My name is Liza, and I'll be assisting with today's webinar. And today we have Customer Success Manager and iFormBuilder trainer Berit, who will be presenting on Zerion Dataflow. And just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So Berit will be going over the basics of Zerion Dataflow, and she'll be walking you through a live demo of building out a Dataflow. We'll cover best practices, and we'll close out with any resources that you can share with your team, as well as take final questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. And Liza, thanks for hosting today and being a part of the session. As I mentioned, or as Liza mentioned, my name's Berit, and I've been working with Zerion for almost 10 years now with iFormBuilder and with Dataflow once we built Dataflow a few years back. So today's session, as Liza mentioned, we're really just going to dive into what Dataflow is, how to get started with it, and I'll even build a basic Dataflow. So with that, let's just jump right in and start talking through what Dataflow is. So in a nutshell, Dataflow automation, or we often refer to it as DFA, is a Zerion product. It provides big data capabilities, including long-term storage, data management, processing, and integration. It allows you to centralize data throughout your organization and build actions to send, update, create, delete, and you're able to connect to the following services. So of course you can connect to iFormBuilder, you can connect to documents, SQL Server database, emails, HTTP post, as well as FormStack and Zoho. So before we jump in, I did want to go through some of these key terms. And this chart, it actually comes from our Dataflow Getting Started guide. And we have a link to that at the end of today's session. Definitely suggest checking that out as you become more familiar with Dataflow. But essentially, what is Dataflow? It's a diagram that maps the movement of the data. It's similar to a workflow. So you think through what is the process that you're going through, but it has an emphasis on the data rather than the processes. A data flow can be thought of as like a container for a project. So each project has its own data flow. Within data flow, we have data flow objects. So an object on the data flow, it looks like a bucket, or some of them look like buckets. They have little different icons, and you'll see that once we start demoing how to build the data flow. But there are four main objects within the data flow. There's a webhook, record set, action, and event. When we say the term record, it is a single line of data. So it is structured as a JSON object, and it is similar to a row in a table. Now we've said JSON, so what is JSON? It's short for JavaScript object notation, and it is a structure that the records are organized in. Lastly, and this is a term that we'll see in the demo later on, is run or transaction. So when data moves through a data flow, it's tracked by a value, which is known as the run ID. And when I show you a sample data flow, you'll also see those run IDs within the data flow and each object. So here's a high-level overview of the steps that you're going to complete. And also on the right-hand side is an example of a pretty advanced data flow that has been built out. You'll notice they all, or some of them start with the green icons, and then, well, they all start with the green, sorry. Some of them start with this webhook icon, and then the other ones are considered the event icons. So I'll talk you through that when we walk through this process. So the first step here is you're able to access data flow by logging into console.zerionsoftware.com. Now, what you have to keep in mind here is you have to have a data flow policy assigned to your username from within the iFormBuilder user management. So in our invitation to this webinar, we did mention that you have to have upgraded your dedicated database to our new user management. And this is why, because you need to be able to give access to data flow. Now, if you haven't upgraded and you still want to use data flow, that is possible. You just have to separate your accounts essentially. You have one whole iFormBuilder account that has different usernames and logins, and then you would have the data flow or console.zerionsoftware.com login as well. But just to talk through what I mean with these policies, I'm going to just jump over to my iFormBuilder account. And in user management, I have this one user that I'm going to be using today. And when I look at this user and I look at the policies assigned to them, I'll scroll down here, you'll see that I have Dataflow Automation Server Admin. So this is the policy that needs to be assigned to your users so that they can access Dataflow. So once you are able to log into console.zerionsoftware.com, you'll be able to click on Dataflow, and I'll jump over here. So once you're logged in, you'll be brought to a page similar to this where you'll see Dataflow as well as documents. Documents also has its own policy within your user management. So if you also want to make use of documents, and I'll be happy to talk more about that later, but you'll have to assign that policy as well. So once you're logged into console, you would click on Dataflow Automation, and you would be brought to the Dataflow home screen. And I'll give you an overview of everything that we see in here in just a little bit. After you've logged in, you'll then create a webhook, which is how you'll connect your data from either iFormBuilder or another web service and have it come into Dataflow. So that's the first step of the process. As I mentioned, you could also make use of creating an event. And an event is based on if an action is successful or if it failed. When we talk through events, when you see these yellow objects, these are our events, and I'll show you what those can entail as well. When data comes in, it is placed in a record set bucket, and those are these blue icons here. These are all record sets. It can then be refined and transformed with our filters, and that makes use of JavaScript. So when you see the record set that has the F on it, that means a filter has been applied, and we'll be building that out within our demo later on today. The last step of the process is that refined data is configured to perform specified actions, which could include being sent to a SQL Server database, potentially documents, iFormBuilder updates, so you can make updates to the forms, the list, the users. You can also do HTTP post as well as HTTP requests. Just some common Dataflow use cases, and the first one is actually what we're going to build out today, a very, very simple Dataflow where we're able to update option lists within iFormBuilder based off of a text field in a form. So a user selects other from a list, they then type in what that other response is, and after they do that, once the user syncs their device, that option list will go through Dataflow and update in the form and in iFormBuilder. Another example here is to have iFormBuilder data cleansed, filtered, or flattened and have it automatically sent to a SQL database table that you can configure. Another use case here is to have updates for a reassignment or assigning or even creating new records within iFormBuilder based off of a specified criteria that you define in Dataflow. So for instance, if a user puts in a maintenance request, for instance, they fill out a whole maintenance request form, and then that form goes into Dataflow, it can then create a brand new record that is used for another form and then assigned to whoever's going to be doing that maintenance request. So you have that ability to recreate to create forms or assign forms within Dataflow. And another example here is that you can filter and transform the iFormBuilder data and have it sent to Zerion documents or FormStack to create that custom PDF. And another use case that I don't have listed in here is to have the data be cleansed within Dataflow and then have it be sent to some sort of reporting tool like Zoho is a common one that we have actually a connection with. So those are just some common use cases and an overview of what Dataflow is. Before I go on and before we start building, Liza, are there any questions?
Not at this time, Berit. All good to continue on.
Okay, so just getting started with building a simple data flow. Our need today was we want to have the ability to update an option list when a user types in a new option in the other text field. So the data flow that we're going to build is just has 4 objects within your Dataflow environment or this Dataflow canvas. So it's going to be rather simple. I wanted us to start simple today so that you have a high-level overview of what Dataflow has to offer. And again, I'll go through the interface. And then after today's session, if you want to do more advanced data flows, I definitely would love to talk to you about that and figure out how we can get you up to speed on building more advanced data flows as well. So when you get the materials, you'll notice I did outline the steps. I didn't give all the details in here. I tried to give enough for you to be able to do this on your own, but of course, watching me do it and having the video is going to be most helpful. So let's just jump back into the Dataflow homepage and talk through the interface that we have here. So on the left-hand side, you'll see our menu. We have our Dataflow Builder, our usage statistics, our connections, as well as support. The connections we'll go into in just a little bit, and so I'm not going to talk too much about that now. The piece that we have in here that we're not going to really talk about, but is a great tool to have, is the usage statistics, where you can just come in and see how active your data flows have been. Now, if we move to the right a little bit, by default, on our home page, we're going to see all the data flows that we have access to. You'll notice that on the all the way on the right, we have these little icons. These are telling us if we've shared this data flow with anyone and who we've shared it with, or if it's just our own. If you've put a timer on one of the data flows that you have, which is a great tool to have, you can say that a user only has access to that data flow for an hour. So if you do that, you will get a notification when that has timed out, or you'll get a notification if someone is requesting access to that data flow. So I just clicked on that icon, and you'll see if I go to request access, it tells me who's in there, and I can approve or deny that access to that data flow. Now to jump back to our Dataflow home screen here, as I mentioned, these are all the data flows we have access to. By default, it will just show you 10 at a time, but you can scroll through the pages if you have more than 10. You also will see that we have a create as well as import. So after today's session, I am going to share the data flow with you. You will be able to import it into your account, but you will have to make a few updates to the data flow so that you can have it usable within your account. So right now, one of the first steps that we do before we even start building the data flow, and this is actually one of our best practices, I would suggest that you map out the workflow that you want to have occur. In this case, we know that we want to have data to come in from a form within iFormBuilder. We want that data to then be filtered out to only show the other, to only have this action occur if other is selected from the option list. And then we want the option list to be updated if text was added to that other text field. So we already have that plan. Now, knowing that we want to connect to iFormBuilder, we actually have to set up a connection. If you've already set up a connection, you don't have to go through this step, but it is needed to perform these iFormBuilder actions. In a nutshell, a connection allows you to log in to some of the actions, that we have. So you'll notice we have, if I wanted to filter, I'm able to build a connection for email, for iFormBuilder, for OAuth, for SQL Server, Web Merge, as well as Zoho Reports. And again, what this does is when you set up the connection to one of these, you have to log in, and then you won't be asked to log in again. If your connection breaks at any point, my guess would be that you probably had changed a password. And if that happens, you'll have to come back here and then create a connection again. So I'm going to walk you through how to create a connection and show you the steps that we have. So for this one, I will call this my Dataflow 1 user iFormBuilder connection. You can keep it short. The reason I'm putting my username in here is because I have other iFormBuilder users that have access to Dataflow, and they're in different profiles. So I try to make it as obvious as possible who's actually connecting to the account. Under type, I'll select iFormBuilder. Whenever you see description, I always fill it in. It is helpful to have it as a resource later on to figure out if you have any questions for how things were configured. After doing that, it asks you for the subdomain. So in this use case, I have it pointing to my training.iformbuilder.com account. So I'll just type in training there, and in the endpoint, I select iFormBuilder. Once I've set this up, I'll go ahead and click Save. Now I've already set up this connection, but I can, of course, set it up again here. So you can have it set up a few times. Bear with me here. And now that I've logged in, the connection has been configured, and I can use that in my data flow. So let's jump back to our data flow builder. We're going to create a brand new data flow today. So I'll click Create. And I'm going to call this Live Webinar Data Flow or Option List Data Flow. Again, try to be as specific as possible with your name so that if you do end up sharing your data flow with other users, they know what it's designed for. After we have put in the details up top, I always create a record set. This allows me to have that record set bucket already built into my data flow so that when the data comes in, it has a place for it to be stored. I also always enable error email notifications just in case, let's say that connection is broken because of a password changing, then you'll be notified right away. So for this record set is going to be used as a storage for my, my data when it comes in from the form. The reason I want it just as storage is because you need to have a record set that has the pure data without any filters attached to it. And as we go through the steps, I'll talk through that a little bit more. But I'll call this webinar storage. So I always use storage as part of the name, just so that I remember. Now, underneath that, we have the option to create a webhook for this record set. This is also something that I always complete. And that is because by creating the webhook, I'm able to copy the webhook and use that within my iFormBuilder account to have the data go directly from iFormBuilder into this data flow. You can configure the name in here as well. You also have the option to create a secure webhook. This does take additional configuration, and we do have some documentation on that if you ever have any questions. So far with building, I'm just going to go ahead and click Save. Now this brings us to our data flow canvas, and you'll notice at the top we have two options. And I do want to point out here, by selecting an object within my data flow, it changes what I see in the menu. So once I chose the record set here, I now see data sources, data refinery, actions, and data outputs. But when I just had the webhook selected, I only saw the data flow and data flow sources. I want to point out here, this is where our webhook URL is. This is what we're going to use when we connect to our form within Form Assignment. Before we do that, I do want to just talk through this canvas a little bit more. So as I mentioned, that first object is our webhook. You're able to see the usage. You're able to see if anyone has requested access of this data flow. And if you have given access, you're able to see who has access to it. If I jump over to this record set, I know we don't have any record data in here yet, but you will notice that we now have more options above our canvas. So we have the usage, again, to see how much activity is happening, this record data, which we are going to use momentarily. If there are any error messages, you will have an icon within the object, and you'll then be able to click on the error messages here and see what those errors are. If we scroll up, as I mentioned before, we do have different menu options. Oh, hold on, please. Okay. You'll notice that we have the ability to export the data flow or share it, as well as import from the data flow menu. The record set, we're going to use this later where we add a record set to this data flow that we're going to use for a filter. You're also able to remove record sets, link them, manually rerun, that's also something we're going to be doing later on, as well as deactivate and delete. I always urge people to deactivate instead of deleting until you're sure you're not going to use any of, well, I should say this. So we have deactivate record set where it doesn't delete the record set, but it will keep it a part of it and just not have it be used. Then we have delete records, which you could use if you want to rerun all the records from iFormBuilder again. We have data sources, so if you do want to upload CSV data or JSON, you're able to do that. We have our data refinery, which we're going to make use of later on. This is where we're going to create a new filter later on. Our actions, as we talked through later, or talked through earlier, and we'll see later, are where you can configure what happens after the data is filtered or transformed. And then we also have data outputs, which allows you to export all of your data either by Excel or JSON. So far, we've logged in, we've set up our connections, we've created a new data flow with our record set and our webhook. We have to do this next step where we're going to copy the webhook URL and place it in a form within form assignment. So I'm going to jump back to my webhook here. And that by just clicking on the webhook icon, I see the URL. I can click the button to copy to the clipboard, or you can highlight it all and copy it that way. Now I've already logged into my training account here. I already have the form open. But we're going to first go under our forms and form assignment. And the form assignment that we are going to edit or add this URL to for the post-processing is going to be our Dataflow Webinar 2022P. Now, I do mention this in the name because when I share the form with you later on, you'll be able to do this step as well. So I'll click Assign. And if I scroll down, you'll notice there's Post Data section. I've already configured one data flow, but I'm going to do another one for today's session. So I'm going to create a new endpoint. I'll call it Dataflow Update List. And I'm going to paste that URL that I copied from Dataflow. For the post data format, it does change how the data appears. There are slight variations between JSON 9 and JSON 10. I try to use the JSON 10 as much as possible because of the fact that it is the latest version. You have the option when you create the endpoint, if you want to also include your labels within the data set. Usually I don't need them, so I don't check that off. But if you do need access to them, then make sure you have it checked off here. Then we go into mode. So you have insert, update, delete, or assign and unassign. Because we are talking about updating an option list, we're going to choose the mode as insert or update. I'm going to just put in my email for notifications and then click Create Endpoint. So what we just did with this step is we connected the data flow that we were building to our form within iFormBuilder. If I jump back to our slides here, so we've clicked Save. The next step for this first part of the process is we want to get some of the data from the iFormBuilder records into the data flow to make sure that that connection is working properly. So to do that, and if you've never used trigger post processing, that's what we're going to go through now. To do that, we're going to select our form from the data view table, and I'm going to just click on the list view. I see the 5 records that I have in here, and then I have the button to trigger post processing. So you can trigger post processing, I think, up to 5 times a day. And you could choose to either do all, which is what I'm doing right now, or you can choose different records. And what it does is it just refires all of the records to be posted to any emails, or in our case, any endpoints that have been added. So I'm going to hit all and click confirm. I'm going to jump back over to my data flow, and I'm going to refresh. And what I see now is in that record set, I now have my 5 records that were triggered from iFormBuilder. Before I go on, I know I just did quite a few steps. So are there any questions, Liza, before we go to the next page with our steps?
No questions, Berit. I think everyone's just taking it all in right now.
All right. So the next step is we're going to add a filter. So we are going to add a new record set to the end of our data flow to have it connect to that storage records that we first created. And we're also going to copy some of the data from that first record set because we'll need that when we create our filter. So let's jump over to our data flow here. So I'm actually going to jump into the record data now and take a look at the records that I have in here. And I want to make sure that I choose one of the records that has other selected from the option list. The reason I want to do that is when I set up my filter, I want to make sure that it's working properly. And we need this record data when we set up the filter. All right, bear with me. Okay, so we're here. And I am going to click the I to look at the record data. And I notice that in the site location categories, it has other. This is what I want to see out. So I want to copy all of this record data to then use with my filter. And momentarily, I will show you what this form looks like so you have an idea as well. So let's copy this, all of this record data. So I hit the copy button at the bottom. Then I'm going to close, go back to my data flow canvas, select my webinar form storage record set, and from here under record set menu option, I'll click the button that said add record set to data flow. So I want to again make sure that my naming is very clear so I have an idea of what is happening within this filter. So I'll say option list other filter. And then I'll click save. Now that I've done that, I'm going to select that new record set and go under Data Refinery and click New Filter. When you look at the data pre-processing jobs, you'll see we have 3 steps. We have the sample data, we have the config, and we have the preview. The sample data is what we just copied from the record data from that first record set storage. So I'm going to paste. And before I go onto that config, I do want to just point out to you again at the bottom where we see the site location categories. This is the data column name that we're going to be using within our configuration. So I did want to point that out. So when we jump down to config, we are going to use a default filter, but within here, you do have the option to use custom filters. You have the option to use the filters to add conditions, so like our built-in. But if you choose custom, you don't see the built-in. You would just copy and paste whatever JavaScript you were using for that filter. Today, we're going the simple route, and we're just going to use the default. So we are now on step 2. What we're going to set up is it's going to start with record dot, and we are calling to, again, that site location categories data column name, and we're saying if in a record this option list has other selected, then I want you to filter it out and include it. If it doesn't have other selected, then I don't want to see it within this filter. So if I jump back to my Dataflow automation, and I'll just paste what I have in there and scroll down and click preview. I want to run the preview. This is going to run the preview against that sample data that I used. So after clicking run preview, I now see everything from the sample data. So that tells me that my configuration worked. If I go back to that sample data and I change other to say hotel, and then I run my preview again, I should hope that I don't see any of the data and that it's empty. That tells me right there that this worked properly and it filtered out to only show other. So now I know that that filter was successful and it works. And what I want to do now is get data into this filter to have it filter out. So as you can see here, I have 5 records, and I'm going to go up to my record set and click manually rerun records. Now what I hope to see, if this is working, I should only see, I think, 2 records in that filter. So I'm going to rerun everything and then refresh, and perfect. We only see the 2 where the user selected other from the list. So I know that's working properly. Before we go to the last and final step, Liza, just any questions? Or are we still doing well?
Still doing well, Berit, no questions.
Okay, so this last step we're going to add in here is we want, if the user selects or types in another option, that it's then added to the site location list. So from our record set, here are our steps we're going to walk through. We're going to add a new action for the form builder option list under the action menu. We'll name the action and also put in our connection, and that connection is going to call to that Dataflow 1 user connection that I created earlier in today's session. Under the command, I'll choose create or update, and then I'll copy the profile ID and paste it, as well as select our option list from the dropdown. Before I talk through steps 18 through 21, let's start with the first few steps. So I'm going to jump back here. I'm going to apply this action to my filter data. So under the actions menu, I'm going to scroll down to where I see forms, iFormBuilder, and option list. So I'm going to name it, add other option to list. And the type of the connection that I'm doing is the one that I just built out, which is my Dataflow 1 user. And the command is I want it to update or create options if they're not there. For the profile ID, this is found within iFormBuilder. So I'm going to jump back here. Here is the profile ID I'm using today. And let me just restart this. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so we are, once we put in our profile ID, it gives us the option to select an option list. So it's calling to that profile. And hold on. For some reason, it doesn't see that I'm connected. So let me just walk you through it again. So actions, we're going to forms, iFormBuilder, option list. I have that connection we built earlier. The command, again, is update or create. We want it to update if there is something similar in there, or if you have it where the name's the same, but maybe the key value is different, you may want that update to occur. And the profile ID, this is what I just copied from my iFormBuilder account. And what I should start seeing is once I have put in that profile ID, it now loads and is giving me the option to select my option list. You could start typing it. So I know mine's called site locations. And once I do that, I'm going to scroll down to my key value and label section. What I want to occur here is I want it to call to the text element that I added. So this is at the bottom. So it's record.other options. I'm only going to set this up for the key value and the label. I don't need it to make any updates to the sort order at this time. And I don't need it to make any condition values like hiding either or any of the scoring. You do have the options to add filters as well as events, but for today, we're going to keep it simple and just make it so that if an option is added to the list, that it is updated. So let's go ahead and click save. And now what I want us to do is I am going to bring up my device and I will show it to you as well. Can everyone see my device?
Looks good, Berit.
All right. So now what we're going to do is just test to make sure everything's working properly. So I'm going to come into my Dataflow webinar form. This is the form I used in the sample data, and how I've configured it is basically what I have is at the top here, I have a list for the site location categories. I can select one of them from the list, and then it doesn't give me that text area to put in the other option. But if I don't see what I need, I can choose other from the list, and now I see this text box. I'll just add the metro station here because I didn't see it in my list earlier, so I'm going to type in metro station, scroll down to the bottom. And just for your information, when I do send over this form, what I've done is I've created it where it makes use of all of the iFormBuilder built-in functions, so you have those as a sample too. I'm going to hit done and then sync my device. And what I hope to see when I do my refresh here in Dataflow is that when the data comes in, it should update our first record set to 6, our second record set that has the filter should be updated to 3. And then when I go into the iForm again, I should then see Metro Station as one of the options. So let me go ahead and click refresh, and exactly what I wanted to see. We have 6, we have 3, and now let me open my device again. And I'm going to create a new record. Under site locations, I'm going to look for Metro Station. There we go. So that's it. Our data flow is complete. We're able to have it where option lists were easily updated without anyone going in to make those edits. I chose to do this as our first data flow just in hopes to give you some sense of what can be done with just one simple data flow and how much time that can end up saving you. Let's go into some of our best practices now. I have talked through some of these already, but I did want to outline them just so you have them as a resource later on. So always plan, draw your data flow either in a flowchart software or even just a piece of paper, a chalkboard, a whiteboard, whatever it is, draw it out first so that when you're actually building the data flow, you're following your blueprint and it's not a build as you go. I mean, this is the same suggestion that we have for when you're building out your forms as well. This produces the best result and the least amount of headaches. Another best practice that we have with data flow as well as with form building is to make sure you're using a naming convention. So use a naming convention that makes the flow of the data clear. For example, if you have an HTTP request called get usernames, name the event that the result goes to event get usernames to show that the two are connected and that one is fed directly by the other. That's exactly what we see with our forms, with our naming convention, parent forms, and subforms. So just try to show the relationships as much as possible when you're naming within your data flow. Record storage, do not apply the transformations or the filters on the record set that's connected to a webhook or event. That's where I mentioned to you, you want to have that original data so you can always go back and view it if anything isn't working and you don't want to have a filter attached to it. With our filters, always apply those or try to apply those to the record sets instead of the actions. By doing it to the actions, it's a little bit harder to troubleshoot. So it's much easier if you just put it in that record set and then troubleshoot as you go from there. When you have transformation code, assign all the variable values at the very top so that you don't have to edit any of the code below, even when some of the small data changes like profile ID or page ID occur. It's much easier to find them and edit those variables when they're at the top of your transformation code. And lastly, one of the most important ones is just test a lot. So use the expected values, make use of null values, long values, short values, and empty values to see what the results look like. And here is a list of our data flow resources. These are all links, and we'll include these in the follow-up email. There's the Getting Started guide. There's a bunch of help desk articles in our Customer Success Center, but I find these to be the most helpful when getting started. We also have a video playlist that I urge you to check out as well, just to see what has been done with data flows and to familiarize yourself with the platform a little bit more. All right, if you don't have access to data flow, just send me an email and I'm more than happy to talk through your options and get that set up for you. And if you look at data flow and you think it's a little scary, I thought that same thing when I first saw it, but the more you use it, the more confident you become in using it, and you start to understand it better, and it can be really, really powerful. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time today, and thank you for attending, and any questions that you may have posted to Liza and have her answer. Thank you for participating, and Liza, thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We loved seeing the turnout, and we're excited that people are interested in learning more. So
awesome, and happy holidays. Thank you.